The gravel crunched beneath Marshall Lawson's boots as he stepped out of his truck, the cold November air biting at his face. He'd been working late at the construction site, overseeing the final inspection of the commercial complex his crew had spent 8 months building. At 42, Marshall had earned his reputation as one of the most reliable general contractors in northern Michigan, a man whose word meant something, whose handshake sealed deals that others needed lawyers for. He'd built that reputation the hard way, starting as a day laborer at 19 after his own father had died in a work accident. Marshall had sworn he'd never let sloppy work or cut corners kill anyone on his watch. 23 years later, he'd never broken that promise. His company, Lawson Construction, employed 47 people and had never had a serious injury. His employees respected him because he worked harder than any of them, often arriving before dawn and leaving after dark. But tonight, as he entered his house on Maple Ridge Drive, Marshall felt the familiar weight that had been pressing on his chest for the past 6 months. The house was too quiet, too empty. His wife Kathy had left him in May, moving into her own apartment across town, though they hadn't filed for divorce yet. She claimed they'd grown apart, that Marshall was married to his work, all the usual lines. But Marshall knew the real reason was her brother. Renee Kerr had always been a problem. Marshall grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and sat at the kitchen table, letting the silence wash over him. At least he had Shannon. His daughter, 17 and brilliant, had chosen to stay with him when Kathy moved out. Shannon was a senior at Lakewood High, straight A's, editor of the school paper, planning to study journalism at Michigan State next fall. She looked like her mother, the same dark hair and green eyes, but she had Marshall's stubbornness, his unwillingness to back down from what was right. The arrangement had been simple. Shannon stayed with Marshall during the week, spent weekends with Kathy. It worked mostly, except when Renee was involved. Renee Kerr was Kathy's younger brother, 36 years old, and still acting like he was 20. He'd bounced between jobs his entire adult life. Car salesman, insurance agent, entrepreneur with schemes that never panned out. Currently, he managed a string of coin-operated laundromats that his late father had left him. Though Marshall suspected the businesses were barely breaking even. Renee drove a BMW he couldn't afford, wore designer suits to family dinners, and had a smile that never reached his eyes. Marshall had never trusted him. There was something off about Renee, something that made Marshall's instincts, honed through years of reading people on job sites and in negotiations, scream warnings. The way Renee looked at women, including his own niece. The way he always seemed to have cash despite his failing businesses. The way he'd pushed Kathy to leave Marshall, whispering poison in her ear about how she deserved better. 3 months ago, Shannon had told Marshall that Uncle Renee made her uncomfortable. She wouldn't elaborate, just said she didn't like being alone with him. Marshall had immediately told Kathy, who dismissed it as Shannon being dramatic. Renee loves Shannon, Kathy had said. He's been like a father to her when you've been too busy working. That had sparked their worst fight since the separation. Marshall had forbidden Renee from being alone with Shannon. Kathy had accused him of being paranoid and controlling. They'd reached an uneasy truce. Renee could be at family gatherings, but Shannon was never to be left alone with him. Marshall drained his beer and checked his phone. It was 10:47 p.m. Shannon had been at her friend Daisy Hansen's house for a study session. She'd texted at 9, saying they were finishing up, and she'd be home by 11. Marshall trusted Shannon completely. She'd never given him reason not to, but he was still a father. He'd wait up. He walked to his home office, a converted spare bedroom lined with blueprints and construction manuals. On his desk sat a framed photo from Better Times. Marshall, Kathy, and 8-year-old Shannon at Mackinac Island, all 3 of them grinning at the camera. He'd been happy then. They all had been. Before Renee had started calling Kathy more often. Before the late-night emergencies that required Kathy to drive to Renee's apartment. Before Marshall had started noticing the distance growing between him and his wife, like ice forming on a lake, thin at first but thickening with each passing day. Marshall sat down and opened his laptop, intending to review next week's schedule. But his mind kept wandering to Shannon, to the worry in her eyes when she'd mentioned Renee. Marshall had dealt with enough scumbags in his life to recognize one. and Renee Kerr was a scumbag. He just hadn't figured out what kind yet. At 11:15 p.m., Marshall's phone buzzed. A text from Shannon, running late. Daisy's mom, making us hot chocolate. Home by midnight. Love you, Dad. Marshall smiled and replied, drive safe. See you soon. He went back to his laptop, losing himself in schedules and supply orders. Construction was straightforward. You followed the blueprint, used quality materials, did the work right. Unlike life, which seemed to delight in complicating everything. At 11:58 p.m., Marshall's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Shannon. Odd. She'd be pulling into the driveway any minute. Hey, sweetheart, Marshall answered. You in the driveway? What he heard next turned his blood to ice. Shannon's voice, high-pitched and terrified. Daddy, Uncle Renee is driving me somewhere. I don't know where. Help me. Please, Daddy, I don't. Then silence. Not just quiet, but complete absence of sound, as if the call had been cut off mid-sentence. Shannon. Marshall shouted into the phone. Shannon. Nothing. Marshall's military training from his 4 years in the Army, 2 tours in Iraq before he'd left to care for his dying father, kicked in immediately. He forced himself to breathe, to think clearly. Panic killed people. Clear thinking saved them. He opened the Find My Phone app on his laptop with shaking hands. Shannon's location appeared on the map, moving north on Highway 31, heading away from town. Marshall grabbed his truck keys and his jacket, already running for the door. He called 911 as he started the engine. 911, what's your emergency? My daughter called me. She's been kidnapped. She's 17. The kidnapper is her uncle, Renee Kerr. She's in a vehicle heading north on Highway 31. Sir, slow down. What makes you think? I don't think, I know. She called me screaming for help. I'm tracking her phone. I'm going after her now. Sir, I need you to stay calm and... Marshall hung up and threw the phone onto the passenger seat. He could explain later. Right now, every second mattered. The truck's speedometer climbed past 80 as Marshall flew down the empty roads. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. His mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Why would Renee take Shannon? Where is he going? Marshall's phone screen showed Shannon's location, still moving, heading toward the Lake District. Clearwater Lake, the old state park that closed after dark. Then, as Marshall watched, the blue dot on his screen stopped moving. Marshall's heart hammered against his ribs. He was still 15 miles away. The truck engine roared as he pushed it harder, passing 90, then 95. The road ahead was dark, except for his headlights cutting through the night. 12 minutes later, Marshall turned onto the gravel road leading to Clearwater Lake. His headlights illuminated the weathered "Park Closed at Dusk" sign. He didn't slow down. The road wound through dense pine forest before opening onto the parking area above the lake. Marshall's headlights swept across an empty lot, then caught the gleam of metal. A black BMW. Renee's car. Marshall slammed on the brakes and was out of the truck before it fully stopped, running toward the BMW. The driver's door was open. The interior light was on. Shannon. Marshall's voice echoed across the still water. Shannon. He reached the BMW. Empty. Keys still in the ignition. Engine off, but the hood was warm. He'd been here recently. Marshall's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he saw the wooden dock extending into the lake about 30 feet away. His breath caught in his throat. On the dock, about halfway down, was a pair of white sneakers. Shannon's sneakers. He'd bought them for her birthday in August. Marshall ran to the dock, his boots pounding on the old wood. He reached the sneakers and looked down into the dark water. The surface rippled, circles spreading outward from a point about 15 feet from the dock. Without hesitation, Marshall tore off his jacket and dove in. The November water was brutally cold, like being stabbed with 1,000 knives. Marshall ignored it, swimming down into the darkness, his hands sweeping through the murky water. His lungs burned. He couldn't see anything. He surfaced, gasped for air, and dove again. Deeper this time. His hands touched something, fabric. He grabbed it and pulled. Shannon's body was limp and heavy. Marshall hooked his arm under her shoulders and kicked toward the surface, his legs burning with effort. He broke through and dragged her toward the dock, his daughter's dead weight making every movement agony. He hauled her onto the dock and laid her flat. She wasn't breathing. Her lips were blue. How long had she been under? 2 minutes? 5? Marshall's hands moved on autopilot, muscle memory from his Army medic training taking over. He tilted Shannon's head back, checked her airway, and began CPR. 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths. Again. Come on, baby girl, Marshall said through gritted teeth. Come on, don't you dare leave me. Water trickled from Shannon's mouth. Marshall turned her on her side and pressed on her back. More water came up. He turned her back and continued compressions. Breathe, Shannon. Breathe. Shannon's body suddenly convulsed. She coughed, water streaming from her mouth. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and terrified. Dad! Her voice was barely a whisper. I've got you, Marshall said, pulling her into his arms. I've got you. You're safe. Shannon coughed violently, bringing up more water. Marshall held her as she shook, both of them soaked and freezing in the November night. He tried to... Shannon couldn't finish, her body racked with coughs and sobs. Don't talk. Just breathe. Ambulance is coming. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing closer. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees. Marshall held his daughter tighter, his mind already shifting from rescue to something darker. Renee Kerr had tried to kill his little girl, had thrown her in the lake and left her to drown. And Renee was still out there somewhere. Marshall's eyes scanned the dark forest surrounding the lake. Where had he gone? His car was still here, which meant he'd fled on foot. Or was he watching from the trees, making sure his victim had died? Did you see where he went? Marshall asked quietly. Shannon shook her head, still coughing. I kicked him when he threw me in. I think I hurt him. He was cursing. Good girl, Marshall said, pride mixing with his rage. Shannon was a fighter. Like him. The sheriff's patrol car skidded to a stop next to Marshall's truck. Deputy Bobby Browning, a man Marshall knew from Little League coaching, jumped out with his flashlight. Marshall? That you? Over here. I need an ambulance. My daughter almost drowned. Bobby ran down to the dock, his flashlight beam sweeping over them. Jesus Christ. What happened? Renee Kerr tried to kill her, Marshall said flatly. He drove her here and threw her in the lake. His car's right there. He ran into the woods. Bobby's flashlight found the BMW. Renee Kerr, your brother-in-law. He's not my anything, Marshall said coldly. He's a kidnapper and an attempted murderer. And when I find him, he's going to wish I'd let the police handle this. Marshall, don't. I want him found. Tonight. Put out an APB or whatever you need to do. This man tried to murder my daughter. The ambulance arrived minutes later, paramedics rushing down to the dock with blankets and a gurney. They worked on Shannon while Marshall stood to the side, dripping and shaking, not from cold, but from fury. As they loaded Shannon into the ambulance, she grabbed Marshall's hand. Don't leave me, Dad. Never, Marshall said, climbing in beside her. He looked back at Bobby. Find him. Bobby nodded grimly. We will. I promise. The hospital was bright and warm, a stark contrast to the cold darkness of the lake. Marshall sat in a plastic chair outside Shannon's examination room, still wearing his wet clothes, a blanket around his shoulders that he'd barely noticed someone putting there. Kathy burst through the emergency room doors at 1:47 a.m., her face pale and panicked. Where is she? Where's Shannon? Marshall stood. She's being examined. She's alive. Kathy ran to him, and for a moment, they were just two terrified parents. What happened? The police said, they said Renee. Marshall's expression hardened. Your brother tried to kill our daughter. He drove her to Clearwater Lake and threw her in the water to drown. Kathy's face crumpled. No, that's not. Renee wouldn't. He did, Marshall said, his voice like gravel. Shannon called me screaming for help. I tracked her phone, found his car at the lake, found Shannon in the water, not breathing. I pulled her out and did CPR. If I'd been 5 minutes later, she'd be dead. Tears streamed down Kathy's face. There must be some mistake. Maybe it was an accident. Marshall grabbed Kathy's shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. She told me he threw her in. This wasn't an accident. Your brother is a monster, and you need to accept that. Before Kathy could respond, a doctor emerged from Shannon's room. Mr. and Mrs. Lawson? How is she? Marshall asked immediately. She's stable. We've warmed her up and checked her lungs. She inhaled some water, but there's no pneumonia yet. We're going to keep her overnight for observation, but she should make a full physical recovery. Physical recovery? Marshall caught the emphasis. What about mentally? The doctor hesitated. She's been through severe trauma. She's going to need time, possibly counseling. Right now, she's asking for you, Mr. Lawson. Marshall walked into Shannon's room. She lay in a hospital bed, looking small and fragile under the white sheets, her dark hair still damp and tangled. Her eyes found her father, and fresh tears welled up. Daddy, Marshall was at her side instantly, taking her hand. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here, he said. Shannon's voice broke. He said I knew too much, that I'd seen something I shouldn't have seen. Marshall's blood ran cold. What did you see? Shannon shook her head, her eyes wide with remembered fear. At the laundromat. Last week, when Mom sent me to drop off her dry cleaning at Uncle Rene's place. I went in the back because the front was locked, and I saw him with these men. They had bags of something and money, lots of cash on the table. When Uncle Rene saw me, he got really angry. He grabbed me and said if I told anyone, something bad would happen to Mom. Marshall's jaw clenched. Did you recognize the men? No, but they scared me, Dad. They had tattoos and looked dangerous. And Rene threatened you? Shannon nodded, tears flowing freely now. He's been texting me all week, saying I needed to keep my mouth shut. Tonight, he called and said Mom was in the hospital, that I needed to come with him right away. I was so scared for Mom that I got his car. But then he drove past the hospital, and when I asked where we were going, he just smiled this horrible smile and said we were going for a drive. That's when I called you. Marshall felt something crack inside him, the careful restraint he'd maintained since finding Shannon in the water. Rene hadn't just tried to kill his daughter. He'd manipulated her, threatened her, used her love for her mother against her. You did exactly right, Marshall said, his voice gentle despite the rage burning in his chest. You were so brave, Shannon. So smart. Is he in jail? Shannon asked in a small voice. Marshall had to tell her the truth. Not yet. He ran when he heard the sirens. But they're looking for him. Shannon's hand tightened on his. Dad, I'm scared. What if he comes back? He won't get near you. I promise you that. Kathy appeared in the doorway, her face red and puffy from crying. Shannon, baby. Mom. Shannon tried to sit up, wincing. Kathy rushed to the other side of the bed, and for a moment, they were a family again, united in their fear and relief. But Marshall knew it couldn't last. This changed everything. After the doctor convinced Shannon to rest, and she'd finally fallen asleep, Marshall and Kathy stepped into the hallway. What did she mean about seeing something at Rene's laundromat? Kathy asked. Marshall told her what Shannon had said. With each word, Kathy seemed to shrink into herself. I don't understand, Kathy whispered. Rene's businesses are legitimate. He inherited them from Dad. Then explain the men with bags of cash, Marshall said. Explain why he threatened our daughter. Explain why he tried to kill her. Kathy covered her face with her hands. I can't. I don't know my own brother anymore. You need to call the police and tell them everything you know about Rene, where he might go, who his friends are. Everything. Kathy nodded weakly. I will. I can't believe this is happening. Marshall's phone buzzed. Deputy Bobby Browning. We found footprints heading east from the lake into the woods, Bobby said. Follow them to Old Miller Road. Looks like someone picked him up there. We found his phone smashed on the road. Probably didn't want to be tracked. We've got patrol cars watching his apartment and the laundromats, and we've issued a bolo for him. Every cop in 3 counties is looking. What about his known associates? Marshall asked. We're working on it. But Marshall, you need to know, we searched his BMW. Found some interesting stuff in the trunk. What kind of stuff? The kind that suggests your daughter stumbled onto something big. We found a bag with $50,000 in cash, a burner phone with encrypted messages, and a 9mm handgun with a serial number filed off. Marshall's free hand curled into a fist. What was he into? I can't share details of an ongoing investigation, But let's just say Renee Kerr was on our radar for other reasons. Your daughter might have just helped us crack a case we've been working for 6 months. After hanging up, Marshall stood in the hospital corridor, his mind processing everything. Renee was involved in something criminal. Something serious enough that he tried to kill a 17-year-old girl to keep her quiet. And now he was in the wind, probably desperate and dangerous. Marshall made a decision. He let the police do their job, but he'd also do his own investigation. He'd spent 2 decades building a network of contacts across northern Michigan, contractors, suppliers, workers who knew people who knew people. If Renee was hiding, Marshall would find him. But first, he needed to keep Shannon safe. At 4 a.m., after Shannon had been moved to a regular room and was sleeping peacefully with Kathy watching over her, Marshall left the hospital. The sun wouldn't rise for another 3 hours, but he had work to do. He drove to his office, a small building adjacent to his construction yard. Inside, he unlocked the safe in his private office and removed something he hadn't touched in 15 years, his military records and service medals from Iraq. Beneath them was a small black notebook filled with names and numbers from his time in the Army. Marshall had never talked about his service, even with Kathy. There were things he'd done, people he'd worked with, operations that remained classified. But now, he needed to reach out to that old network. He dialed a number from memory, one he'd never written down. The phone rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. This better be important. Felix, it's Marshall Lawson. A pause. Marsh? Jesus, it's been what, 10 years? 12. I need a favor. Felix Hubbard had served with Marshall in Iraq, an intelligence specialist who'd left the Army to start a private security consulting firm. He specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. Name it, Felix said simply. In their world, you didn't hesitate when a brother called. Marshall explained the situation in clipped, precise terms. Send me everything you have on this Renee Kerr, Felix said. Photos, addresses, known associates. I'll have my people start looking. And Marshall? If we find him before the cops do, then I'll handle it personally, Marshall said coldly. Roger that. Sending you a secure number now. Use that for all communication. After hanging up, Marshall sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. He'd crossed a line tonight, one he couldn't uncross. But he didn't care. Renee Kerr had tried to murder his daughter. Whatever happened next, Marshall would make sure Renee paid for that. His phone buzzed with an encrypted messaging app download link from Felix. Marshall installed it and immediately received a message. Package received. Already have 2 hits on facial recognition. This guy's been busy. More soon. Marshall smiled grimly. Renee Kerr thought he could hide. He was wrong. The sun was rising when Marshall returned to the hospital. Shannon was awake, sipping water and talking quietly with Kathy. They both looked up when he entered. Hey, Dad, Shannon said, her voice stronger. The doctor says I can go home tomorrow. That's good news, Marshall said, kissing her forehead. How are you feeling? Tired. Sore. But okay, I think. She hesitated. Dad, did they catch Uncle Renee? Not yet. But they will. Shannon's eyes showed fear again. What if he comes after me again? Marshall pulled up a chair and took her hand. Listen to me carefully, Shannon. You're not going back to school until this is resolved. You're staying with me. And I'm hiring private security to watch the house. Renee Kerr will never get within 100 yards of you again. That's a promise. Marshall, isn't that a bit extreme? Kathy asked. Marshall turned to his wife, his eyes hard. Your brother tried to drown our daughter last night. I don't think anything I do can be extreme enough. Kathy flinched but didn't argue. I've also hired a lawyer, Marshall continued. We're filing for a restraining order against Renee, and I want emergency custody formalized. Shannon stays with me. You can't just. I can and I will. If you want to fight me on this, Kathy, go ahead. But ask yourself who the judge is going to believe. The father who saved his daughter's life, or the mother whose brother tried to end it. It was harsh, but Marshall didn't have time for gentleness. Shannon's safety was all that mattered. Kathy's face crumpled again, but she nodded. You're right. She should stay with you. I'll sign whatever papers you need. Thank you, Marshall said, his voice softening slightly. I know this is hard. He's your brother. He's a stranger, Kathy whispered. I don't know him at all. Marshall's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Felix. Possible sighting. White Pine Motel, 40 miles north. Checking now. Marshall stood. I need to make some calls. I'll be right back. In the hallway, he typed, on my way. Don't move until I get there. Felix replied, negative. This is surveillance only. If it's him, we call local PD. Marshall wanted to argue, but Felix was right. They needed to do this by the book, or at least appear to. He typed back, understood. Keep me posted. But even as he sent the message, Marshall knew that if Felix confirmed Renee's location, nothing would stop him from paying his brother-in-law a visit. The police could arrest him afterward. First, Marshall needed answers. He needed to know why Renee had targeted Shannon. He needed to know what criminal enterprise Renee was involved in. And most importantly, he needed to look Renee Kerr in the eyes and make him understand the magnitude of his mistake. You don't touch Marshall Lawson's daughter. Not ever. And if you tried, you paid a price that would make prison look like mercy. The hunt had begun. 24 hours after pulling Shannon from Clearwater Lake, Marshall stood in his kitchen at 6 a.m., brewing coffee and reviewing the information Felix had sent overnight. Shannon was still asleep upstairs, exhausted from her ordeal. A former Marine named Clifton Schaefer sat in an SUV outside, the first of 3 security personnel Marshall had hired through Felix's firm. The White Pine Motel lead had been a bust. Wrong person, similar build and hair color. But Felix's team had been busy. They'd pulled Renee's financial records, credit card statements, phone logs from his businesses, and surveillance footage from various locations. The picture emerging was disturbing. Renee Kerr wasn't just a failing laundromat owner. He was running a money laundering operation through his businesses, washing cash for a drug distribution network operating across northern Michigan. The men with bags Shannon had seen were likely couriers dropping off dirty money. Renee would run it through the laundromat's coin machines and fake receipts, then deposit clean cash into legitimate bank accounts. Felix had estimated Renee was moving roughly $200,000 per month. His cut was probably 20%, $40,000 for closing his eyes and feeding machines. Not bad money for a lazy man with no conscience. But Shannon had seen too much. A teenage girl stumbling onto a drug money operation was a liability. Renee had panicked and made the worst decision of his life. He tried to eliminate the witness. Marshall's phone buzzed. Felix calling. Got something solid, Felix said without preamble. Renee's girlfriend, Lorna Lane, works at a bar called the Rusty Anchor in Harbor Springs. They've been seeing each other for 3 years, but he kept it quiet. Probably why your wife didn't know. I've got eyes on her apartment now. Renee hasn't shown up yet, but I'm betting he contacts her. Address? Marshall, let the police. Address, Felix. A sigh. I'll text it to you. But if you're going to do something stupid, at least take backup. Clifton's good people. Use him. I'm just going to talk to her, Marshall said. That's all. Right. And I'm just a consultant, Felix said dryly. Be careful, brother. After hanging up, Marshall drank his coffee and considered his options. The smart play was to pass this information to the police and let them handle it. But Marshall wanted answers first. He wanted to understand the full scope of what Shannon had walked into, what danger she might still be in. At 8 a.m., Kathy arrived to stay with Shannon. She looked haggard, like she hadn't slept. Any word? She asked. Not yet, but they're getting close. Kathy nodded, her hands wrapping around a coffee mug. I've been thinking about everything Shannon said. About the laundromats. I helped Renee with his books last year when his accountant quit. There were discrepancies I didn't understand. Cash deposits that seemed high for the amount of business he was doing. He said it was a busy summer, and I believed him. Did you keep copies of anything? Some spreadsheets. They're on my laptop. I can send them to you. Send them to the police too. It'll help their case. Kathy looked at Marshall with red-rimmed eyes. I'm so sorry. I should have listened when Shannon said Renee made her uncomfortable. I should have believed her instead of defending him. You couldn't have known what he was capable of, Marshall said, though part of him blamed her for being blind to her brother's nature. Can you forgive me? Marshall was saved from answering by Shannon appearing in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in a blanket. Morning, Dad. Mom. Both parents rushed to her, and the conversation shifted to breakfast and whether Shannon needed anything. But Marshall caught Kathy's eye over Shannon's head and gave a small nod. They'd talk about forgiveness later. Right now, family came first. After Shannon had eaten and settled on the couch with Netflix, Marshall pulled on his jacket. I'm heading out for a few hours. Clifton's outside if you need anything, and I've got 2 other men patrolling the neighborhood. Where are you going? Shannon asked, following up on some leads. I'll be back by lunch. Shannon nodded, then said quietly, Dad? Find him. Please. I will, sweetheart. I promise. The Rusty Anchor sat on a side street in Harbor Springs, a dive bar that probably looked better at night with dim lighting. At 10 a.m., it was closed, but Marshall could see movement inside through the grimy windows. He knocked on the door. After a moment, it opened to reveal a woman in her early 30s with bleached blonde hair and suspicious eyes. We're closed, she said. Lorna Lane. Her eyes narrowed. Who's asking? Marshall Lawson. I'm Renee Kerr's brother-in-law. I need to talk to you about him. I don't know any. Please, Marshall interrupted. My daughter's life might depend on it. Something in his tone must have reached her, because Lorna hesitated, then stepped back. 5 minutes. That's all you get. The bar smelled like stale beer and cigarettes. Lorna leaned against the counter, arms crossed defensively. What do you want? I know about you and Renee. I know you've been seeing each other for 3 years. I need to know where he is. Haven't seen him in days, Lorna said quickly. Too quickly. Lorna, Renee tried to kill my 17-year-old daughter 2 nights ago. He drove her to a lake and threw her in to drown. If I hadn't found her in time, she'd be dead. Now, I don't know how much you know about what Renee's involved in, but I promise you this. If you help him hide, you become an accessory to attempted murder. Lorna's face had gone pale. He wouldn't. Renee wouldn't hurt Shannon. He talks about her all the time, says she's smart and... He dumped her in a lake and left her die, Marshall said flatly. The police have physical evidence, witnesses, everything. And when they arrest him, and they're going to look at everyone connected to him, including you. Lorna sank onto a bar stool, her hands shaking. Jesus Christ. Tell me what you know about his business. The laundromats. I don't know anything about that. I swear. Marshall studied her face. She looked genuinely shocked and scared. Maybe she really didn't know. Has he contacted you since Sunday night? No. I tried calling him yesterday, but his phone's off. If he does contact you, you need to call the police immediately. Don't tell him where you are. Don't agree to meet him. Just call the cops. Lorna nodded, tears streaking her makeup. I can't believe. Why would he hurt Shannon? Because she saw something she wasn't supposed to see. And Renee decided his criminal enterprise was more important than the life of child. As Marshall turned to leave, Lorna called out, Wait, there's this guy, Pedro. Renee talked about him sometimes, said he was his business partner. I always thought they were talking about the laundromats, but now I heard them on the phone once, and Pedro was saying something about the shipment and cleaning the money. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Pedro have a last name? May I think? Pedro Man. Renee said he lives in Traverse City. Marshall pulled out his phone and typed the name into an encrypted message to Felix. Anything else? Renee has a cabin up near Sleeping Bear Dunes. It was his dad's hunting cabin. Renee doesn't use it much. No electricity, no running water, but he mentioned it once as a place to lay low if things got hot. I don't know exactly where it is, but it's somewhere near Glen Arbor. Thank you, Lorna. You may have just saved my daughter's life. Back in his truck, Marshall received a response from Felix, Pedro Man, 38, 2 priors for drug distribution, known associate of Orlando Dean, suspected to run distribution for a cartel operation. This is bigger than we thought. I'm sending everything to local DEA. Marshall started the engine, his mind racing. Renee hadn't just stumbled into petty crime. He was connected to serious players, people who wouldn't hesitate to kill to protect their operation, which meant Shannon might still be in danger. If Renee was desperate, or if his partners decided she was still a liability, Marshall's phone rang. Deputy Bobby Browning. Marshall, we need you to come to the station. What's wrong? Is it Shannon? No, she's fine. But we got a hit on Renee's credit card. He used it this morning at a gas station in Glen Arbor. We're organizing a search of the area, but we want to let you know. Glen Arbor, where Lorna said the hunting cabin was. Bobby, there's a cabin somewhere near there. It belonged to Renee's father. No electricity or water. That's where he's hiding. How do you never mind? Can you find out exactly where? I'm working on it. Marshall hung up and called Kathy. I need you to call Renee's mother. Ask about the old hunting cabin near Glen Arbor. Say you're worried about Renee, that you want to help him. Get the exact location. Marshall, I don't know if I can. Kathy, please. This might be our only chance to find him before he disappears completely. Okay, I'll try. While waiting, Marshall drove toward Glen Arbor. It was a 2-hour drive, but he wanted to be close when they found the cabin. His phone buzzed with updates from Felix. Pedro Man was now in federal custody for an unrelated violation, singing about the drug operation to reduce his sentence. He'd confirmed Renee's role in the money laundering and given up several other players in the network. The walls were closing in on Renee Kerr. And when they did, Marshall wanted to be there. Kathy called back 20 minutes later. I talked to Doris. She gave me directions to the cabin. It's off Old Timber Road, about 3 miles past the state park entrance. There's a dirt trail marked with a blue blaze on a tree. The cabin's half a mile down that trail. Thank you, Marshall. Don't do anything stupid. Let the police handle this. That's the plan? Marshall lied. He called Bobby and relayed the information. I'm on my way there now. ETA in 90 minutes. Marshall, wait for us. We're assembling a team, but it'll take time. I'm not going to the cabin. I just want to be nearby when you take him into custody. Another lie. Marshall ended the call and pushed his truck faster. He'd given the police the information they needed, but he'd get there first. He needed to talk to Renee man-to-man to understand why his brother-in-law had decided Shannon's life was worth less than dirty money. He needed that conversation before the lawyers got involved, before Renee could hide behind rights and procedures. 1 hour and 40 minutes later, Marshall turned on an Old Timber Road. It was barely more than a path through the forest, rutted and overgrown. He drove slowly, watching for the blue blaze Kathy had mentioned. There, a faded blue mark on a massive oak tree. Marshall pulled his truck off the road and killed the engine. He checked his phone. No signal this deep in the woods. Perfect. That meant Renee couldn't call for help either. Marshall reached under his seat and pulled out a tire iron. He wasn't planning violence, but he wasn't walking into this unprepared either. Renee had already proven himself dangerous. The trail was muddy from recent rain, winding through dense forest. Marshall moved quietly, using skills he'd learned in the army. After about 20 minutes, he smelled wood smoke. He approached carefully, staying in the tree line. The cabin emerged from the forest, a ramshackle structure barely bigger than a garden shed, with a sagging roof and broken windows covered with plastic. Smoke drifted from a crude chimney. Renee's BMW wasn't visible, but Marshall spotted fresh tire tracks leading to a small clearing behind the cabin. He'd driven in from another direction. Marshall circled the cabin, looking for the best approach. There was only one door, facing the trail. 2 windows, both covered. If Renee had a gun from his operation, Marshall was walking into a dangerous situation. But he'd faced worse in Iraq. At least here, he knew his enemy. Marshall approached the front door and knocked hard at the tire iron. Renee, I know you're in there. We need to talk. Silence. The police know where you are. They'll be here in less than an hour. If you want any chance of explaining yourself before you spend the rest of your life in prison, open this door. More silence, then movement inside. The door cracked open, and Renee's face appeared. He looked terrible, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, clothes dirty. A far cry from the smooth businessman who'd sat at Marshall's dinner table making jokes. Marshall, Renee said warily. You shouldn't be here. Neither should you. But here we are. Renee opened the door wider. His right hand was behind the door frame, probably holding a weapon. Did you come alone? Yes. Why? Because I want to understand why you tried to kill my daughter. Renee's face twisted. I didn't want to. You have to believe that. I never wanted to hurt Shannon. Then why did you? Renee stepped back, gesturing Marshall inside. The cabin was even worse inside. A single room with a cot, a wood stove, and supplies scattered on a rough table. Renee's hand came into view. He was holding a revolver, but it was pointed at the floor, not at Marshall. Put the gun down, Marshall said quietly. Can't do that. You're going to turn me in. Yes. But I won't hurt you if you don't point that gun at me. Renee laughed bitterly. You expect me to believe that? I try to kill Shannon. If someone did that to my kid, I'd tear them apart. I'm not going to lie. I want to, but I need answers more than I need revenge. Why, Renee? Shannon trusted you. Renee sank onto the cot, still holding the gun loosely. He looked broken. It was supposed to be simple. Move some money, make some cash, nobody gets hurt. I didn't ask where the money came from. Didn't want to know. But Shannon saw those guys, and they got spooked. Pedro said she had to go, that loose ends get people killed. I told him she was just a kid, that she wouldn't tell anyone. But he said if I didn't handle it, they would. And it wouldn't just be Shannon. They'd take out the whole family. You, Kathy, everyone. Marshall's hands tightened on the tire iron. So you decided to murder a 17-year-old girl to save your own skin. To save all of you. Renee shouted. Don't you get it? These people don't mess around. If I hadn't done it, they would have killed Shannon anyway, and then killed you and Kathy for good measure. At least my way, it would have looked like an accident. You'd all be safe. That's your justification? That you were doing us a favor? Renee's hand shook. I didn't know what else to do. I got in too deep. Marshall. The money was good at first, and I didn't think about the consequences. Then suddenly I was in with people who kill for a living, and there was no way out. There's always a way out. Not from Orlando Dean. You don't walk away from him. You either do the job or you disappear. Permanently. Marshall moved closer, watching Renee's gun hand. Shannon's alive, Renee. I pulled her out of that lake. She's safe at home right now. Renee's face went white. She's alive? Yes. Which means attempted murder instead of murder. You might actually survive prison. Renee started crying, the gun slipping from his fingers to the floor. Marshall kicked it away and stood over his brother-in-law. I'm sorry, Renee sobbed. God, I'm so sorry. I was so scared. Pedro said I had one chance to fix this, and if I didn't, they'd make an example of my whole family. I thought if Shannon was gone, they'd leave you alone. And instead, you guaranteed that both you and your partners are going down. Shannon's testimony, combined with Pedro's confession, is going to bury all of you. Renee looked up sharply. Pedro confessed. He's in federal custody, singing like a bird to reduce his sentence. He gave up you, Orlando Dean, and everyone else involved. The color drained from Renee's face completely. Then I'm dead. Even if the cops get me, Orlando will have people inside. I'll be shanked within a month. That's your problem, Marshall said coldly. You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. In the distance, sirens approached. The police had made good time. Renee heard them too. His eyes darted around the cabin, like a trapped animal looking for escape. They'll kill me, Marshall. You don't understand. These people. Good. Marshall interrupted. You deserve whatever you get. You tried to murder my daughter. You terrorized her for weeks. You betrayed your own family for drug money. If Orlando Dean's people do catch up to you in prison, that's justice as far as I'm concerned. Renee lunged for the gun, but Marshall was faster. The tire iron came down hard on Renee's wrist, and he screamed, clutching his arm. Marshall kicked the revolver further away and planted his boot on Renee's chest. Don't make this worse than it already is. The sirens were close now, and Marshall heard vehicles stopping on the trail. Bobby Browning's voice called out, Marshall? You in there? In here, Bobby. I've got him. Deputies flooded into the cabin, guns drawn. They took in the scene, Marshall standing over Renee, who was crying and cradling his injured wrist. He's unarmed, Marshall said, stepping back. I kicked his weapon over there. Bobby secured the revolver while two other deputies hauled Renee to his feet and cuffed him. Renee Kerr, you're under arrest for attempted murder, kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and participation in a drug trafficking organization. You have the right to remain silent. As Bobby read Renee his rights, Marshall watched his brother-in-law being led away. There was no satisfaction in it, just a cold sense that justice was being served. Renee would face trial, probably plead guilty to reduce his sentence, and spend the next 20 years or more in prison. And Marshall would make sure Shannon never had to see him again. Bobby approached once Renee was in the patrol car. You were supposed to wait for us. I got here first, Marshall said simply. His wrist is broken. He reached for his gun. I defended myself. Bobby studied Marshall's face, then sighed. I should charge you with interference in a police investigation. But you won't. No, because you gave us the location that let us catch him, and because your daughter nearly died because of that bastard. But Marshall? Next time, wait for the professionals. There won't be a next time. Marshall walked out of the cabin and down the trail to his truck. His hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. He confronted the man who'd tried to kill his daughter, had looked him in the eyes and seen nothing but a coward who'd made terrible choices and tried to justify them. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Renee was just one piece. Orlando Dean was still out there. And if Renee was right about the threat to Marshall's family, then Shannon might still be in danger. Marshall pulled out his phone as he reached his truck. Signal was returning. He called Felix. Renee's in custody, Marshall said. But he mentioned someone named Orlando Dean. Said Dean ordered the hit on Shannon and would kill the whole family if Renee didn't comply. Orlando Dean, Felix repeated. I'll pull everything I can find on him. Give me 2 hours. Make it fast. If Dean thinks my family is a liability, we need to know what he's planning. On it, Marshall drove back toward home, his mind already planning the next steps. He'd protected Shannon from Renee, but now he needed to protect her from whatever came next. And if Orlando Dean decided to finish what Renee had started, Marshall would be ready. He'd spent his whole adult life building things, structures, businesses, a family. Now he was prepared to destroy anyone who threatened what he'd built. Renee had been first. Orlando Dean would be next. And Marshall Lawson didn't leave his enemies standing. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. 3 days after Renee's arrest, Marshall sat in a small office at the county courthouse with Shannon, Kathy, and their lawyer, a sharp woman named Stephanie Fuller who specialized in family law and victim advocacy. The restraining order hearing was a formality. Renee remained in jail on $500,000 bail that no one was willing to post, facing charges that would likely keep him in prison for decades. But Shannon needed this. She needed the legal system to officially say, "You're protected. He can't hurt you." Judge Marcus Dodge, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness, reviewed the petition. "Miss Lawson, I understand you've been through an extraordinary trauma. The court has reviewed the police reports, medical records, and witness statements. Before I issue this order, I want to hear from you directly. How do you feel about seeing your uncle again?" Shannon sat up straighter, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Your Honor, I'm terrified of him. He tried to kill me. He threatened my mother to keep me quiet about what I saw. I don't feel safe knowing he exists in the world, but I especially don't feel safe knowing he might someday be free. I need to know that no matter what happens with his trial, he can never contact me, approach me, or come near my family. You have my word on that," Judge Dodge said gently. "This court is granting a permanent restraining order. Mr. Rene Kerr is prohibited from contacting you, your father, your mother, or anyone in your household through any means, directly, indirectly, or through third parties. He may not come within 500 feet of your home, your school, or any location you regularly visit. If he violates this order, he'll face additional criminal charges." Shannon's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you, Your Honor." After the hearing, Marshall and Shannon walked out of the courthouse into bright October sunshine. Kathy had left separately, still struggling with her role in what had happened. The divorce papers had been filed 3 days ago. Marshall felt nothing about it, except relief that Shannon would be protected. "Ice cream," Marshall suggested. Shannon smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen since the lake. "Yeah, that sounds good." They drove to Betty's Diner, a local institution where Marshall had taken Shannon since she was old enough to eat solid food. They slid into their usual booth, and Betty herself, a woman in her 70s who'd run the place for 40 years, came over with a concerned expression. "Heard what happened, Marshall? That sweet girl of yours. How's she holding up?" "I'm okay, Miss Betty," Shannon said. "Thanks for asking. You're stronger than okay, honey. You're a fighter." Betty squeezed Shannon's shoulder. "Ice cream sundaes on the house. Both of you." As Betty walked away, Shannon said quietly, "Everyone in town knows, don't they? It made the news," Marshall admitted. "But people are on your side, sweetheart. You're the victim here, not something to be ashamed of. I know. It just feels weird having people know private stuff about me. Marshall understood. Small-town life meant nothing stayed private for long, especially not something as dramatic as what had happened. Their Sundays arrived, hot fudge for Marshall, caramel for Shannon, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "Dad," Shannon said eventually, "can I ask you something? Anything. In the hospital, I heard you making phone calls, talking to someone about finding Uncle Rene. It sounded like military stuff from before I was born." Marshall had known this conversation would come eventually. "I was in the Army before you were born. Infantry, then intelligence. I don't talk about it much because some of what I did remains classified, but yes, I reached out to old contacts to help find Rene." "Were you like special forces or something?" "Not quite that elite, but I did some specialized work. Learned how to find people who didn't want to be found, how to gather intelligence, how to operate in hostile territory." He paused. "Shannon, I need you to understand something. Everything I learned in those years, every skill I acquired, I would use all of it and more to protect you. There's no length I wouldn't go to keep you safe." Shannon reached across the table and took his hand. "I know, Dad. That's what scares me." "Scares you? When you pulled me from the lake, when I was coughing up water and you were holding me, I saw your face. You looked," she searched for the word, "dangerous. Like you were ready to kill someone. I've never seen you look like that before." Marshall squeezed her hand gently. "In that moment, I would have. If Rene had still been there, if I'd seen him while you were dying in the water, I don't know what I would have done. But I'm not a killer, Shannon. I'm your father, and I'm a builder. I make things. I don't destroy them unless I absolutely have to. But you would have destroyed Uncle Rene." "Yes," Marshall said honestly. "If that's what it took to save you, yes." "Does that scare you?" Shannon thought about it, then shook her head. "No, it makes me feel safe. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me. That's my worry, not yours. Your job is to heal, to get back to being a teenager, to think about college and your future. My job is to make sure you have that future." They finished their Sundays and drove home. Clifton Schaefer was still parked outside in his SUV, though the immediate threat had passed with Rene's arrest. Marshall was paying for 24-hour security for another week, just to be safe. Inside, Shannon went upstairs to her room, and Marshall headed to his office. He had a new encrypted message from Felix. "Found Orlando Dean. Bad news. He's connected. Real connected. Mexican cartel ties, political protection, the works. Runs his operation out of a supposedly legitimate import-export business in Traverse City. DEA has been building a case for 2 years but can't touch him. Too many lawyers, too much money. Witnesses keep disappearing or changing their stories. Pedro Man was their best shot at flipping someone close to Dean, and even he's only giving up middle management. Worst news, Dean knows about Shannon. Word is he's pissed that Rene screwed up and brought heat down on the operation. But our sources say Dean's also pragmatic. The operation is being shut down and moved elsewhere. Dean's cutting his losses and getting out of Michigan. He's probably going to disappear into Mexico within a month. Good news, he's not coming after your family. You're not worth the risk for him. Shannon's testimony will help prosecute Rene and his associates, but doesn't touch Dean directly. As far as Dean's concerned, you're collateral damage that's already been dealt with. He's moving on. My advice, let it go. Your daughter's safe. Rene's going to prison. Don't poke the hornet's nest by going after a cartel-connected drug lord. You've won this fight, brother. Declare victory and protect your family. Marshall read the message 3 times. Felix's advice made sense. Shannon was safe. Rene was in custody. The immediate threat had passed. A smart man would count his blessings and move on. But Marshall wasn't feeling particularly smart. He was feeling angry. Orlando Dean had ordered the hit on his daughter. Maybe Dean hadn't pulled the trigger or thrown Shannon in the lake, but he'd given the order. And now he was going to walk away, disappear into Mexico, and probably continue his business elsewhere with other victims. Marshall typed back, "Send me everything you have on Dean. Operations, addresses, known associates, daily routines. Everything." Felix's response was immediate. "Marshall, don't do this. This isn't like dealing with Rene. Dean has resources, protection, and no conscience. If you go after him and fail, Shannon becomes a target again. Then I won't fail. Brother, think about what you're saying. This is a war you can't win. Every war can be won. It just depends on what you're willing to sacrifice to win it. A long pause. Then, if I send you this information, it's for intelligence purposes only, not for action. Understood. Understood. Another pause. I'm sending it because you're my brother and I trust your judgment. But Marshall, if you do go after Dean, make sure you have an exit strategy. These people don't forgive and they don't forget. The file arrived 10 minutes later. Marshall spent the next 2 hours reading every detail. Orlando Dean, age 47, ran Dean Import-Export from a warehouse complex in Traverse City. On paper, he imported textiles and handicrafts from Mexico and Central America. In reality, he was using shipping containers to move drugs north and laundered money south. He employed a network of distributors across Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois. His operation moved an estimated $5 million per month. Dean lived in a lakefront mansion south of Traverse City, protected by private security. He drove a Mercedes S-Class with a chauffeur. He dined at expensive restaurants and donated to local charities. He had a wife, Velma, and 2 teenage sons. He attended church every Sunday. He was, by all appearances, a legitimate businessman and pillar of the community. Except he'd ordered the murder of a 17-year-old girl. Marshall studied the file late into the night, looking for weaknesses, for vulnerabilities. Dean's operation was sophisticated, but sophisticated meant complex. Complex meant points of failure. And every point of failure was an opportunity. Marshall wasn't going to confront Dean directly. That was Renee's mistake. Acting impulsively, trying to solve problems with violence. Marshall would be smarter. He'd do what he did best, build something. But this time, he'd build a trap. Over the next week, Marshall put his plan in motion while maintaining the appearance of moving on with his life. Shannon returned to school with a security escort. Marshall went back to work, managing his construction projects, attending meetings, being visible and normal. But at night, he met with Felix and Clifton, who'd agreed to help despite their reservations. Together, they assembled the pieces of their operation. First, they needed leverage. Dean's operation depended on his warehouse complex, where containers arrived from Mexico, were unloaded, and drugs were distributed to local dealers. The warehouse had security, but it wasn't impenetrable. Felix's team included former Special Forces operatives who specialized in exactly this kind of infiltration. Second, they needed documentation. It wasn't enough to disrupt Dean's operation. They needed to ensure he couldn't rebuild. That meant gathering evidence that would survive legal scrutiny and couldn't be explained away by expensive lawyers. Third, they needed to ensure Dean couldn't retaliate. That was the trickiest part. Even if they destroyed his Michigan operation, Dean still had connections and resources. He could hire people to hurt Marshall's family out of spite. Marshall's solution was as elegant as it was ruthless. He made sure Dean was too busy running for his life to worry about revenge. The operation began on a Friday night, 3 weeks after Shannon's abduction. Dean's warehouse received a shipment from Mexico every Friday at 10 p.m. Felix's sources had confirmed the pattern. This Friday, Marshall and his team would be waiting. At 9:30 p.m., Marshall hugged Shannon goodnight. She was having a sleepover at Daisy Hansen's house, a return to normalcy that her therapist had encouraged. Kathy would pick her up in the morning. Everything was normal. Everything was safe. At 10 p.m., Marshall was parked half a mile from Dean's warehouse, dressed in black tactical gear, earpiece connected to Felix and Clifton's team. Eyes on target, Clifton's voice came through. 2 guards at the front gate. For inside, container truck just arrived. Electronic countermeasures in place. Another voice reported. Surveillance cameras are looping. They'll see nothing but empty warehouse. Team 2 ready at secondary entrance. Marshall waited, his heart steady, his mind clear. This was no different than coordinating a complex construction project. Timing, precision, execution. Team 2 go. On his tablet, Marshall watched the operation unfold via helmet cameras. Clifton's team entered through a side door, moving silently through the warehouse. They reached the office where Dean's operations manager, a man named Elmer Pittman, was overseeing the container unloading. Pittman never saw them coming. One moment, he was checking invoices. The next, he was zip-tied to his chair with a hand over his mouth. "Don't make a sound," Clifton said quietly. "We're not here to hurt you. We're here to give you a way out." Team 1 took control of the guards with similar efficiency. No shots fired, no violence beyond necessary restraint. Marshall had been clear about this. They weren't criminals. They were delivering justice. "Package secure," Felix reported. Moving to Phase 2. Phase 2 was where Marshall's construction expertise came in. Hidden throughout the warehouse were small devices that looked like junction boxes or electrical components, but were actually high-definition cameras and listening devices. By the time Dean's people discovered them, if they ever did, they'd have recorded weeks of criminal activity. But that was backup. The real prize was Pittman's computer. Felix's cyber specialist, a former NSA contractor, connected a device and began downloading everything. Financial records, shipping manifests, distribution networks, names and addresses of every player in Dean's organization. "This is beautiful," the specialist murmured. "Dean keeps everything on local servers, no cloud backup. He's old school. This is his entire operation." "How long?" Marshall asked. 90 seconds for complete copy." "But Marshall, you need to see this." On Marshall's tablet, a directory appeared. Inside were files labeled by name. One caught his attention. Lawson. He opened it. His heart went cold. The file contained surveillance photos of his house, Shannon's school, Kathy's apartment. Detailed schedules of everyone's movements. Notes about security measures. And most chillingly, a single document dated 3 weeks ago. Secondary option if primary fails. Eliminate entire family to prevent testimony. Make it look like accident. House fire recommended. Implement only if necessary and ensure no connections to organization. Marshall's hands clenched. Dean hadn't just ordered Shannon's death. He'd been prepared to kill all of them if Renee failed. The only thing that had saved them was Renee's arrest and Dean's decision to shut down the Michigan operation. "Copy that file first," Marshall said coldly. "I want every detail." "Already done. Copy complete," the specialist announced. "Extraction? Go. Leave the surveillance equipment active." Clifton's team released the guards and Pittman, leaving them confused but unharmed. By 10:47 p.m., Marshall's people had vanished in the night, leaving no trace except functioning surveillance equipment that would continue recording Dean's illegal activities. Marshall drove home, the weight of the Lawson file heavy on his mind. He'd known Dean was dangerous, but seeing documented proof of the planned massacre of his family crystallized something in Marshall's heart. This wasn't just about justice for Shannon anymore. It was about ensuring Orlando Dean never threatened anyone again. At home, Marshall called Felix. "Phase 3 needs to happen faster than planned." "What changed?" Marshall told him about the file. Felix was silent for a long moment. "Jesus. Okay, I understand. We can move up the timeline. The DEA will be very interested in this data. I can have it on their desks by Monday morning, along with an anonymous tip about active surveillance equipment in Dean's warehouse." "Do it. But I want something more." "What?" "I want Dean to know. I want him to understand that the evidence that's going to destroy him came from Shannon Lawson. I want him to spend every day in prison knowing that the girl he tried to kill was the one who brought him down." "Marshall, that puts Shannon in danger." "No. It puts Dean in a position where retaliation becomes impossible. Once the DEA raids his operation, Dean will be in custody. His organization will collapse. His cartel connections won't waste resources on a failed operation. They'll cut him loose. And from prison, Dean will be powerless." Felix considered this. "It's risky. Everything worth doing is." "All right. I'll make sure the evidence package includes a note. Something that makes it clear where this came from." On Monday morning, federal agents raided Dean Import-Export. They arrested Orlando Dean, Elmer Pittman, and 14 others. They seized financial records, drugs, weapons, and enough evidence to guarantee decades of prison time for everyone involved. The raid made national news. Drug trafficking operation busted in Michigan. Cartel connections exposed. Federal prosecutor calling it one of the largest organized crime takedowns in state history. Marshall watched the news with Shannon, who was homesick from school with a cold. "That's the guy?" Shannon asked, watching footage of Dean being led to a police car in handcuffs. "The one Uncle Renee worked for? That's him. He looks so normal, like somebody's dad. The worst ones usually do." Shannon was quiet for a moment. "Did you have something to do with this?" Marshall met her eyes. "The police have been investigating Dean for years. They finally got the evidence they needed." "That's not what I asked." Marshall sighed. "Sometimes doing the right thing means operating in gray areas. I can't tell you more than that, sweetheart. But I can tell you that the man who ordered your death is going to prison for the rest of his life, along with everyone who worked for him. And he knows exactly why. He knows that you survived, that you're strong, and that trying to hurt you was the biggest mistake he ever made." Shannon leaned against her father. "Thank you, Dad. Always." That evening, Marshall received a message from Felix. Dean's lawyer reached out through back channels. "Wants to negotiate." Dean's scared. The cartel dropped him. They don't reward failure. He's in protective custody, knows he can't survive Gen Pop. He wants to cooperate with feds for a better deal. Marshall typed back, "Not good enough. I want him to suffer." "Brother, you're letting this become personal. It's always been personal. He threatened my family, and now he's finished. His operation is gone. His money's frozen. His connections have abandoned him. He'll die in prison. That's justice." Marshall knew Felix was right, but the rage still burned. He wanted more than prison. He wanted Dean to feel the fear Shannon had felt in those moments before she was thrown in the lake. He wanted Dean to understand true helplessness. But revenge wasn't the goal. Protection was. And with Dean in federal custody, cooperating with prosecutors, his organization dismantled, Marshall's family was safe. He typed, "You're right. It's done. Smart man. Get some rest. You earned it." 6 weeks later, Marshall sat in a courtroom for Renee Kerr's plea hearing. The prosecution had offered a deal: plead guilty to attempted murder, kidnapping, and participation in a criminal enterprise, serve 30 years minimum before parole eligibility. Renee had taken it, avoiding a trial that might have given him life without parole. Shannon was not present. Marshall had insisted she didn't need to see this. But Kathy was there, sitting across the aisle, her face drawn and aged by stress. When Renee was brought in, shackled and wearing an orange jumpsuit, he looked like a ghost of his former self. Prison had not been kind. He'd been attacked twice already. Inmates didn't like child predators or snitches, and Renee was both. Judge Dodge reviewed the plea agreement. "Mr. Kerr, you understand you're pleading guilty to attempted murder of a minor, kidnapping, and RICO violations? The sentence recommendation is 30 years minimum in federal prison." "Yes, Your Honor," Renee said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you understand you're waiving your right to trial?" "Yes." "Very well. Does the victim or victim's family wish to make statement?" Marshall stood. He'd prepared remarks, but now, looking at the broken man who tried to kill his daughter, the words seemed insufficient. "Your Honor, my daughter is 17 years old. She's smart, kind, and has her whole life ahead of her. 6 weeks ago, this man drove her to a lake and threw her into the water to drown. He watched her struggle. He listened to her scream for help. And then he walked away, leaving her to die. The only reason my daughter is alive is because she called me, and I was able to track her phone and reach her in time. I pulled her from that water and performed CPR while she wasn't breathing. I had to save my own daughter from the actions of a man she'd trusted her entire life. Shannon is physically recovered, but she has nightmares. She's afraid of water now, won't go near the lake. She looks over her shoulder constantly, even though her attacker is in custody. That fear will probably never completely go away. This man didn't just try to kill Shannon. He tried to kill my family's sense of safety and trust. He succeeded in destroying our relationship with my wife's family. He forced us to question everyone and everything. I hope the 30 years Mr. Kerr will serve gives him time to think about what he destroyed. Not just a family's peace, but his own soul. Because anyone who could hurt a child like that has no soul left." Marshall sat down. Renee was crying, but Marshall felt no sympathy. Judge Dodge banged his gavel. Mr. Kerr, you have pleaded guilty to heinous crimes against a child. The court accepts your plea and sentences you to 30 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole before serving the minimum sentence. You will also be required to register as a violent offender upon release if you live that long. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none. Bailiff, remove the defendant. As Renee was led away, he looked at Marshall one last time. Their eyes met, and Marshall saw fear. Good. Let him be afraid. Let him spend the next 3 decades looking over his shoulder, wondering when violence would find him. Outside the courthouse, Kathy approached Marshall. Thank you, she said quietly, for saving her. For everything. You don't need to thank me. She's my daughter. Can we talk? Just for a minute. They walked to a bench overlooking the parking lot. Kathy twisted her hands in her lap. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About my role in it. I didn't just ignore Shannon's concerns about Renee. I actively dismissed them, told her she was overreacting. I chose my brother over my daughter. Tears rolled down her face. I don't know how to live with that. You live with it by being there for Shannon now, Marshall said. By believing her when she tells you something's wrong. By putting her first, always. The divorce papers, you haven't signed them yet. No. Why not? Marshall considered his answer carefully. Because divorce isn't what Shannon needs right now. She needs stability. She needs to know her family isn't completely broken. Do you think we could try again? You and me? I don't know, Kathy. A lot of damage has been done. Trust is hard to rebuild. But not impossible. Not impossible. But it would take time. And work. And complete honesty going forward. Kathy nodded. I can do that. I want to do that. Then let's start with small steps. Family dinners once a week. Therapy, together and individually. And Shannon comes first in every decision. Every single one. Agreed. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Kathy said, I heard about Orlando Dean's arrest. The news said an anonymous tip led to the raid. That wouldn't have been you, would it? I'm a general contractor, Kathy. I build buildings. I don't investigate drug cartels. She gave him a knowing look. Right. Just like you're not responsible for Renee's broken wrist or for Dean's entire organization getting taken down exactly when it would most benefit our family. Coincidences happen. Marshall Lawson, you're a terrible liar. He smiled slightly. Shannon's safe. That's all that matters. And if Dean ever gets out, if he comes after us, he won't. He's facing life without parole, and his former associates want him dead. He's not a threat anymore. Kathy studied his face. You made sure of that, didn't you? I made sure our daughter can sleep at night without fear. How I did that is between me and my conscience. Thank you, Kathy said again. I know I don't deserve your protection after what I did, but thank you for protecting Shannon. Always. Thanksgiving arrived 3 weeks later. Marshall, Shannon, and Kathy gathered around the table in Marshall's house. Kathy had moved back in tentatively, taking the guest room while they worked on their relationship. Shannon had made significant progress in therapy. The nightmares were less frequent. She'd started laughing again, joking with friends, planning for college. She was resilient, like her father. As they held hands to say grace, Marshall looked at his daughter, alive, safe, strong, and felt gratitude more profound than any prayer could express. Before we eat, Shannon said, I want to say something. Go ahead, sweetheart. I've been thinking about what happened. About Uncle Renee and that Orlando Dean guy and everything. And I realized something. The world has people in it who will hurt you just because they can, or because it's convenient, or because they don't see you as human. That's scary. But the world also has people like you, Dad. People who will dive into freezing water without hesitation to save someone. People who will fight monsters to keep their family safe. People who won't give up, no matter how hard things get. I don't know all the details of what you did after the lake, but I know you made sure those bad men couldn't hurt anyone else. I know you made me safe, and I know you did it because you love me. So thank you, Dad, for everything. I'm alive because of you, and I'm going to make that life count. I promise. Marshall couldn't speak around the lump in his throat, so he just squeezed Shannon's hand tighter. Kathy wiped tears from her eyes. To family, she said, raising her glass of water. To family, Marshall and Shannon echoed. They ate and laughed and shared stories, a family healing from trauma, but not broken by it. Later, after Shannon had gone to bed, Marshall stood on his back porch, looking at the stars. His phone buzzed with a final message from Felix. Dean pleaded out. Life without parole. Gave up his cartel connections in exchange for protective custody. He'll spend the rest of his life in a 6x8 cell, looking over his shoulder. Renee's already been transferred to a supermax after another attack. They'll both die in prison, forgotten and alone. Your family is safe, brother. Mission accomplished. Marshall deleted the message and put his phone away. It was over. Shannon was safe. Justice had been served, maybe not in the traditional sense, but served nonetheless. He'd built a life, almost lost it, and fought to get it back. The scars would remain. Shannon's fear, Kathy's guilt, Marshall's own knowledge of what he'd done in the shadows. But scars were proof of survival. They showed you'd been tested and hadn't broken. Marshall went back inside, locked the door, and set the security alarm. Tomorrow he'd return to his normal life. Construction projects, parent-teacher conferences, the mundane routine of everyday existence. But tonight, he'd sleep knowing his daughter was safe in her bed, alive and dreaming of her future. In the end, that's all that mattered. Marshall Lawson had faced his nightmare and won. And if anyone ever threatened his family again, he'd be ready. Because he wasn't just a builder anymore. He was a protector. A father who'd proven there was no length he wouldn't go to defend what he loved. And that made him far more dangerous than any criminal could ever be. On a cold February morning, 6 months after the lake, Shannon received her acceptance letter from Michigan State University School of Journalism. She screamed with joy and ran to show Marshall, who was in his home office reviewing blueprints. Dad, I got into Michigan State. Marshall pulled her into a bear hug, pride overwhelming him. Of course you did. You're brilliant. And they offer me a partial scholarship for academic excellence. That's my girl. Shannon pulled back, her eyes shining. I want to write about crime and justice. I want to tell stories about people who survive terrible things and come out stronger. Maybe my story will be the first one I write. You'd publish what happened to you. Why not? I'm not ashamed. I survived, and maybe reading about it will help someone else who's going through something similar. Maybe they'll see that you can be terrified and hurt and still come through it okay. Marshall touched her cheek gently. You're going to change the world, Shannon Lawson. I learned from the best. That evening, Marshall and Kathy took Shannon out to celebrate at her favorite restaurant. They laughed and talked about the future, dorm rooms and football games, and new experiences waiting. For the first time in months, the shadow of what had happened didn't hang over them. As they drove home, Shannon said from the back seat, "You know what's weird? I'm grateful." Grateful? Kathy asked, confused. Not for what Uncle Renee did, but for what it showed me. That I'm stronger than I thought. That Dad would move heaven and earth to save me. That our family could survive anything. I wouldn't have chosen to go through that, but now that I have, I'm not the same person. I'm better, stronger, more sure of who I am and what I want. Marshall met her eyes in the rearview mirror. You were always strong, sweetheart. You just didn't know it yet. Maybe, but now I do, and nobody can take that away from me. Back home, Marshall sat in his office and opened his safe one last time. He removed the black notebook with Felix's contact information and the documentation of everything they'd done to bring down Orlando Dean. He fed the pages through his shredder, destroying the evidence of his vigilante justice. Some secrets were meant to die. The world didn't need to know that Marshall Lawson had operated outside the law to protect his family. All that mattered was the result. Justice served, evil punished, innocence protected. His phone rang. Felix. Saw the news about Shannon's scholarship. Congratulations. Thanks. She's over the moon. She should be. Kid's got a bright future. A pause. I'm calling to say goodbye, brother. I'm retiring, moving to Montana. Getting too old for this game. You earned it. Thanks for everything, Felix. I couldn't have done this without you. You saved my life in Fallujah. I just returned the favor. Besides, taking down scumbags like Dean and Kerr is what I live for. Live for, I guess. Past tense now. Enjoy your retirement. You deserve it. You too, Marsh. Go build buildings and watch your daughter conquer the world. Leave the vigilante stuff to younger men. Already done. That part of my life is over. Good. But if you ever need me again, I know where to find you. After hanging up, Marshall sat in the darkness of his office, reflecting on everything that had happened. 6 months ago, his life had been normal, predictable. Then one phone call had shattered that normalcy, revealing threats he hadn't known existed and forcing him to become someone he'd hoped never to be again. But he'd done what needed to be done. Shannon was safe. The men who'd threatened her were behind bars. His family was healing. Justice had prevailed. Marshall stood and walked upstairs. Shannon's bedroom door was open, and he could see her at her desk, working on her laptop, probably already writing her Michigan State application essay. "Night, sweetheart," he said from the doorway. "Night, Dad. Love you. Love you too. More than you'll ever know." Marshall went to bed next to Kathy, who was reading a book on rebuilding trust after betrayal. They had a long way to go, but they were committed to the journey. As he drifted off to sleep, Marshall's last thought was simple. Tomorrow he'd wake up and go back to being Marshall Lawson, general contractor and father. The protector who'd operated in shadows could rest now. His daughter was safe. His family was whole. His enemies were defeated. And that was all the victory he needed. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.